welcome to the PI show. My name's Harry Nowicki. I'm a personal injury lawyer. Here with my colleague Tony Carbone, personal injury lawyer. And we've got a special guest, Dr. Peter Larkins, who is a sports physician. And tonight we're talking about sports injuries. And we should sort of get straight into it because there's a lot to cover. The first part of sports injuries that people in Melbourne would be aware of would be sports injuries in the AFL competition. And Dr. Larkins, we haven't got enough time to read out all his qualifications and his expertise, but Doc Larkins was a Geelong club doctor and also the Victorian club doctor for the Adelaide Crows. I take it in the glory days of the Adelaide Crows?
Well, no, it was actually, the first 7 years they came to the competition, 1996. As soon as I left, they won 2 flags, so I think that might have been saying something about my lack of contribution.
Oh, okay.
You set
the foundation.
Those first 7 years were critical to get to success at the Crows.
Set the foundation. But again, historically, you were the Geelong club doctor when Tom Hafey was...
Tom Hafey's coach, yeah. In the early 80s, I was one of the medical officers down at Geelong for a 6-year period, and Tom Hafey was the coach during most of that time when I was there. And then
they had limited success.
They had limited success, yeah. They were always just on the cusp. Fortunately, Geelong doing a bit better current the last few seasons.
They have. But what we should talk about probably is, a topic of conversation every week in the AFL season are sports injuries to AFL footballers, and there's been some horrendous injuries. But just tell us a bit about the history of club doctors in the AFL. It started off, I think, as volunteers.
Yeah, well, I mean, the AFL's 150 years old now, as we know, but arguably the last 20 years, the medical care has really just improved dramatically the last 10 years. Honorary doctors, what used to be that were in the 1970s and 1980s, often just a local GP who was interested in a fan of the club. Used to be maybe a club trainer and a couple of massage people to strap the ankles, and that was it.
And a bit of smelling salts.
Smelling salts and a wet towel was about all that ran onto the field when you saw someone go down. But these days, arguably, at the match or during the week, there's 35 to 40 people that are involved in the medical care and the preparation of the players from a fitness perspective.
The club doctor now is a paid professional.
I was about to say most of the 16 clubs, most of them have 2 doctors, so there's roughly 32 very elite AFL doctors in the country. Most of them are sports physicians. They're paid a salary now, which is commensurate with their professional training. The physiotherapists are full-time, so often the club will have a full-time physiotherapist there for the players, 30 hours a week. The club doctors invariably spend 25 to 35 hours a week, including interstate travel and training, so it is a much more professional setup now to try and look after the elite players in the country.
But nevertheless, it's an impact sport, so you've got inevitably injuries that occur on game day. What's the role of a doctor on the game day? They've got to make very quick decisions about whether a player can participate in the contest or not. Yeah,
look, I think, certainly in Melbourne and in Victoria, we live and die by whether your footy team's doing well, and we know that if your players are injured sitting in the grandstand, you're not going to have a successful season. So there's a lot of decisions got to be made on match day itself. There's only 22 players available to the coach to work with, and if you've got somebody off early in the game, or 2 players off with the rotations these days, it's been shown that success of winning the game goes down 10% if you've got 1 player missing, 25% if you've got 2 players missing by half time in terms of your lack of chances of winning the game. So the doctor's often making decisions about whether it's safe for a player to go back on the ground after a minor ankle injury or a sprain of a ligament. You'll often see the physios work on them, strap them up, and they'll go back on if the doctor thinks it's safe to do so.
Tell me, is there a conflict between the doctor saying it's unsafe and the player saying, I want to go on?
Oh, there's always a contest between the doctor and the player. The players obviously want to play. That's what they're paid to do. Often they're on performance-based contracts as well. So, but look, the players are given a good talk before the season by the doctors to explain that there'll be circumstances when we're going to keep you off the ground during the game.
Regardless of what
you say, the medical care will come ahead of what the coach wants, and the medical care will come of what the player wants. I mean, at the end of the day, the doctor's responsible for his own decisions, and he has to live by that from a professional point of view. But at the same time, there are many occasions when the player's injury will be sufficient so that they can be protected with strapping or protected with some physiotherapy and go back on and dealt with the next day. So it's always it's a balanced decision that the doctors have to make as to whether a player returns on the day in order not to make the injury worse for the following week.
Doc, are you aware of any cases where players have sued doctors or the club because of situations where they've been told to go back on the ground when they shouldn't have?
Look, there's been a couple of cases over the last 20 years or so where players have taken action against the club because what they thought was negligent care. Or there was a case in Western Australia, there was a case here in Melbourne of a player, one of the Melbourne-based clubs. It's been pretty rare because, again, there's an informed consent thing that the players are very much aware of in terms of whether they're making decisions to play with a partly healed injury, play with a local anaesthetic injection, for instance. And so, as long as the player is aware of the risk, it's very hard to come back later on and say, oh, I didn't know the risks. I think that era where players weren't given the information, they just want to go back on, doc, jab me up, put me back on, I don't care what the injury is. We've gone past that.
Being a Hawthorn supporter and losing Trent Crode from the team completely is a bit disappointing. So, was it a proper decision to get him back on the ground?
Oh, look, I mean,
to play him in the final?
Look, in hindsight, you'd say, it was a tragedy that Trent Crode had that injury, of course. But I mean, he certainly went in with a minor sprain in his foot. The club he trained during the week. A lot of discussion held with Trent Crode himself about whether he wanted to play. Grand finals are pretty exceptional times.
I thought he had a fracture in the foot. I didn't realise it was a sprain. I thought it was a bit more.
No, he had a ligament sprain through the middle part of his foot and it was well known. And there was clearly going to be some discussion about whether he could play at the level where he could contribute properly. He clearly did. I mean, unfortunately, the injury became worse, which is again is one of the risks that you take. And I don't think Trent's in any position where he's feeling any angst against suing the club.
He's played in the grand final.
Yeah, and he's got a medallion around his neck, which players will say, I've got that for life. Unfortunately, he's got a very significant injury, but I guess that's footy. And I think Trent has accepted that he took a risk, and unfortunately, he got a consequence from that.
And again, all the issues about pressure on players to come back. Nick Riewoldt's got a significant injury, and again, there's speculation about what's the appropriate time. Is it his decision or is it the club doctor's decision?
Oh, look, if it was Nick's decision, he would have played a week ago. I mean, so it's definitely the fitness advisors, the surgeon, the medical people. As I said, very highly skilled at AFL level. So we're talking about people that are very experienced. As I said, they've got fellowships in sports medicine, many of these people. And there's a lot of discussion about what's the appropriate time for players to go back. And Nick Riewoldt has certainly been an exceptional case this year, one of the most unusual injuries, along with Josh Gibson at your club, Tony, and Daniel Kerr in the West. So Nick Riewoldt's, certainly his recovery has been so carefully monitored. There's no question that that's been a medical decision for him to go back.
Doc, it sounds to me that the club's a bit more conservative than the players. The players do want to get back on the ground, don't they?
They do, but I think the recurrence of injuries used to be a big issue. So you hear about players coming back, Tony, and then they'd redo the injury a week later or 2 weeks later, particularly hamstrings. And so there has been a conservative swing about when they're ready, let's give them another week and make sure they've got to have often 2 full weeks of high intensity training before they get picked. The coach wants them back.
Well, the game's a lot faster too, so you'd imagine that's
well, the demands of the game have changed enormously. There's no question about that. But I think the medical care and the fitness really takes that into account.
Look, it's been very interesting. We're going to have to go to a sponsors break, Doc. So look, viewers, don't go away. Keep watching. We'll be back very, very shortly. Thank you.